I'm going to cover the method that I use to fabricate my own wood studs to mount the engine cowling to the fuselage. What I've decided to do is to use these number 10 2-inch long wood screws along with these black nylon washers. These are number 8 washers. You can see the ID size here, 0.173, the OD is 0.375, and they're 0.062 inches thick. And those look like this. I just bought a bag of them, a bag of 100, and they're just simple nylon washers. And then I've also fabricated my own small rubber flat washers. These will act almost like little insulators between for the engine cowling to fit between. So what I'm going to do now is go over how I made these little rubber washers to begin with. What I have is a piece of, this is like 3/32. It's, yeah, we'll call it an 1/8 inch thick piece of black rubber, and using simple hole punches. I have another video, a hint video, where I actually cut this. This tool here had originally come with a handle on it, but I cut the handle off so I can put this in my drill press, and I spin it in the drill press to punch my holes in my vinyl for the cockpit combing trim. But this is a good size to use for the small hole in the rubber. Just punch down and make your small hole. And then I use this big size. This is 1/2 inch diameter. This then, after I have the small hole punched, I'll put this down over the hole. I'll shine a flashlight down through here, and I'll bore sight through here with the flashlight and get this centered over the small hole that I had already punched. And then of course you end up with this little washer. Alright. So next step then is to take your number 2 screw. Let me get this clutter out of the way. My number 10 2-inch long wood screw. I take this. I take one of the black nylon washers, and I split it with the utility knife. That goes up on here. Kind of thread it on, and then you can slide it up on the shank. And then you take 2 of your black rubber washers, slide them up onto here. I seem to be missing, there he is. Alright, so this is the second rubber washer. It gets slid on like that. And then a final black nylon washer. Now this one has not been split. These you kind of have to thread on. The split one you can fit on pretty easily, but the non-split nylon you have to feed it on. And what will happen is this will stop at the shoulder. Like that. And then you slide these back down to the bottom like that. Make sure this is all the way up against the shoulder. Push these down to it. Now all I need to do is leave a little bit of a gap here for the pinhole, and then a little bit of thickness, web thickness I call it, from the end of the stud. So the hole is going to go here to hold these in place, and then a little bit beyond that is where I'm going to cut this head off. And then what you end up with is a number 10 screw with the head cut off. And I'll try to get this in here. You can see how that has basically been cut just beyond the washers. And I'm going to have to clean this end up and then put a hole in it for the pin itself. Okay? So let me work that backwards real quick. So this is the non-split nylon washer that needs to be screwed on. And then the two rubber washers. And then this is the split nylon washer so that it can fit up over the shank. Okay, I put that whole assembly together, then I take this over, I clamp it in my vise, and I go ahead and cut this head off roughly where I believe there's enough room for the hole for the pin. Alright, let me go do that, and I'll move on to drilling the hole. So here is the screw, lightly chucked in my drill press. I'll spin it, and then I'll come underneath it here with a file, and I'll just run my file under it while it's spinning to smooth off the head part. And then I'll come around the edges here with the file and just put a little bit of a chamfer on it just to clean up the edges and get rid of the roughness. Now I'll take this out, I'll put it in my vise, and I'll get ready to drill the little hole through it for the pin. Alright, so here we are back at the drill press, and I've got the screw in my vise, and I've got a really tiny drill bit. This is a starter drill bit. It's very small, and you can see that I've got it chucked very high into the chuck. In other words, I've got just a very little bit of the drill itself sticking down beyond the chuck jaws. That's so because the drill bit is so small, I don't want it to bend and wobble and move around, so I chuck it up really tight. And a little bit of cutting fluid, I'll come down, and just back from the edge, I'll start drilling my hole. I'll drill this hole all the way through, making sure that it's square down through the center of the shaft of the screw. Then I'll take this small drill bit out, and I'll switch it over to the drill bit big enough for the pin to fit through. Most pins are about 40 thousandths of an inch thick. So I went with, I don't recall, but a drill bit slightly bigger than 40 thou for the final hole. And then I'll go ahead and deburr the hole on both sides of the stud. So let me get that done, and I'll come back. So now I'm ready to go ahead and install the stud into the fuselage. Of course, I've already got the pilot hole drilled into the fuselage at the location that I want the stud to go into, and I like to use a little bit of epoxy to help seal the hole, the wood, and it also helps prevent the stud from vibrating and potentially backing out, which I don't think is going to be an issue regardless, but I just like to put a little bit of epoxy on it to help seal it once it's driven in. What I don't show on here, because I've already got one installed on the fuselage, you need to pre-install your non-slit nylon washer. This needs to be threaded all the way up to the shoulder, and then the stud will get driven into the fuselage, and this will be trapped because with it being unslit, it can't go up beyond the shoulder of the stud. Okay? So make sure you have this in place first up here, then put your epoxy on, and then you can go ahead and drive this into the fuselage up to your nylon washer. And again, this will be trapped because it can't fit beyond the shoulder of the stud. Okay? Now, I recommend using 2-inch screws just because it gives you a lot of thread, a lot of penetration. But depending on how your fuselage is fabricated, depending on where you actually drive these into the fuselage, 2 inches may be a little bit too long. And of course, you can cut the screw back as needed. These are just a smidge, maybe an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch too long for my application. I drove one in dry just to check the fit, and the very tip of it broke through the other side and was sticking into the cabin. So I cut this one back a little bit. But this is ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and drive it now. So there's the driven stud. Of course, I've got it cleaned up. You know, you get epoxy bleeding out different places, but I've got it pretty much cleaned up, and it's driven into the fuselage, into the structure of the fuselage, and then I'll get it loaded up with the different rubber washers and whatnot, and you can see how the final fit is. So there's the final fit. Of course, back here up against the fuselage is the non-split plastic washer, and that's trapped because the hole's not big enough to make it up past the shaft, the shank of the screw, so it's trapped now. And then I've got my two rubber washers. Of course, the aluminum then will be between these two, and then the outside split washer, which gets slid on, and then I just got the drill bit in there to act as the pin. So you would pull your pin off, you would slide off your split nylon washer, slide off one of your rubber washers, and if you take the final rubber washer off, there's the stud with the other nylon washer trapped. Okay? You can see with these two put together, it gives you a nice little space between where your aluminum panel will slide on over top of this and the fuselage itself. So there's a little bit of an air gap here between your aluminum and the fuselage. And once you get your engine cowling fit over top, you put your other outside rubber and then your final split nylon, and then repin it. So here's the finished product. I just have a piece of scrap aluminum in place to act as my engine cowling, and I've got my one rubber washer on the inside and then the nylon washer on the outside, and a drill bit to act as the pin. And then of course behind it I've got the same situation. I've got the rubber up against the aluminum, and then the nylon washer is trapped between the fuselage and the shank of the screw. So that's it. I highly recommend that you trial fit a scrap piece of aluminum, because what I had found out when I drove this one in all the way, I didn't have enough studs sticking out to get my aluminum and the various washers in place and still be able to pin it. So I had to back this out a half a turn to walk the stud out from the fuselage so I'd have enough room to get all my pieces in and pin it. So trial fit them before the epoxy sets up, just to make sure that they're the proper length and you can get everything pinned as required.